Why was the range suddenly so quiet? The clang of steel targets and the echo of rifles had filled the air moments before, a chorus of sound that soldiers carried like background music to their pride. But the moment she stepped onto the cracked concrete, something shifted. It wasn't noise that faded, it was ego. Boots scraped, a few laughs sputtered, but then even those died out as every eye cut toward her. Lieutenant Mara Kaninkade. Her walk wasn't loud, but it was certain, deliberate, as if every step had already been weighed, balanced, and accepted. Dust swirled low across the barren training ground, catching the glare of the noonday sun. Bravo Company, a line of polished rifles and sharper smirks, eyed her like a stranger crossing a border uninvited. "This ain't your range, girl." Colonel Hendricks chuckled from the shade of the bleachers, arms folded, chest puffed with old authority. His voice carried like gravel rolling downhill, meant to cut, meant to remind. He expected her to laugh nervously, maybe mumble an apology, maybe retreat. That's what most would do under the weight of a colonel's casual dismissal. But Mara didn't move. Not a flinch, not a smile, not even the courtesy of a glance. Her face stayed still, eyes narrowing on the farthest target, gray and storm-dark. Inside, her breath steadied, a slow exhale, as if she'd already lived this moment long before it happened. It wasn't the colonel she saw. Not really. It was the face of Sergeant Callahan falling in the Afghan mountains. The blood, the pine needles, the ringing silence after the ambush. She had been 21 then, young, raw, still learning what it meant to hold a rifle not just as a tool but as a lifeline. She had carried his dog tags ever since, a constant weight in her pocket, metal against skin, memory against memory. Myra shifted her grip on the weapon now resting against her shoulder. The stock was scarred, worn smooth in some places by years of friction. Her thumb brushed a small mark on the wood, one of many, tiny etchings, a story carved not in words but in numbers. She knew what they meant. Hendricks didn't, not yet. The men lining the range saw her rifle too. Some smirked, some whispered. "She won't last a week here. Out of her depth. Colonel'll eat her alive." Mara heard them all, cataloged each word like ammunition she wouldn't waste. The power of stillness was something no manual taught, but she had mastered it. Let them talk, let them doubt, let them underestimate. The colonel took a few heavy steps forward, boots grinding gravel, shadows stretching across her line of sight. He grinned the way men grin when they believe time is still on their side. "Don't think we let just anyone wander onto this range," he said, tilting his head toward the rifle in her hands. "Most women wouldn't last a day under real fire. Why don't you just—" He stopped. It wasn't respect that cut his sentence short. It was doubt, flickering sharp in his eyes when Mara raised the weapon, her cheek pressing into the worn stock with the ease of someone greeting an old friend. The steel glint caught the light as her finger brushed the trigger. Click! The shot cracked, sharp, precise. The far target kicked dust exactly where she aimed, not an inch astray, not a fraction off. Click another. The next impact folded into the first, a pattern too exact to ignore. Murmurs rippled through the line of soldiers. Whispers turned into silence as she reloaded, shot, reloaded again, each round like a declaration, like punctuation in a story only she understood. By the 5th shot, no one laughed. By the 10th, even the colonel's jaw tightened. Mara didn't look at him. Her eyes remained downrange, calm, unyielding. The sound of the trigger pulling became rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. Every bullet was a memory, every impact a testimony. Afghanistan, Syria, the unnamed deserts where shadows carried rifles and promises alike. The hillsides where too many friends had fallen. She didn't shoot for applause. She shot because she remembered. And she remembered too much. Her finger eased off the trigger as the rifle lowered. Not abruptly, not for effect. Just deliberate, measured, her body language as precise as the shots themselves. She let the silence linger. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably, caught between admiration and disbelief. Then she turned, her eyes locking onto the colonel's. Steel against stone. Lucky streak, she asked, voice low, each word placed like a chess piece across the board. Hendricks blinked, his lips twitching between a sneer and something else, something he hadn't worn in years. Restraint. Respect. He caught himself, straightened his chest, tried to laugh. One streak doesn't make a sniper, he said. His tone was tighter now, his words sharper. Mara glanced at the rifle in her hands. Her thumb traced along the wooden stock again, pausing over the etchings carved into it. Small notches. So many they seemed endless, like grooves worn into stone by the persistence of rain. Not a streak, she said softly, a record. She tilted the rifle just enough for the colonel to catch it, for the men standing nearby to see. The marks, 121. The number struck harder than any shot fired. Soldiers leaned closer without meaning to, eyes widening as they counted, mouths dry as realization set in. They weren't scratches of vanity. They weren't a show. Each one meant a mission. Each one meant a kill. Each one meant survival, for her, for someone else, for the nameless many who never knew she had stood between them and a bullet. The colonel's throat bobbed. His eyes flickered down to the rifle, then back to her. A silence heavier than the midday heat stretched across the range. And in that silence, Mara didn't gloat, didn't explain, didn't offer the story behind each mark, the villages she had protected, the convoys saved, the friends avenged. She let the number speak. Let the weight of it sink into them all. The wind carried dust between them, lazy spirals twisting like smoke. The smell of gunpowder lingered, sharp in the throat, bitter in the lungs. Private Jennings, barely out of his teens, shifted near the back of the line. He'd been whispering doubts earlier, jokes he thought no one had heard. Now he swallowed hard, the sound loud in his own ears. "I didn't think she could do it," he muttered, not realizing he'd spoken aloud. Mara heard. Her voice, when it came, didn't rise, didn't lash. It was calm, steady. The way water sounds when it carves stone. "Don't just think, son," she said, eyes still on the targets. "Observe, learn, respect comes after mastery, not before." Jennings dropped his gaze, shame crawling into his cheeks. But he wasn't angry, he was learning. And that was the point. Hendricks finally exhaled, the fight in him dulled. He stepped back, boots crunching gravel, the weight of silent defeat settling into his shoulders. He hadn't been shouted down. He hadn't been challenged outright. He had simply been undone, bullet by bullet, mark by mark, presence against pride. Mara nodded once, not to him, but to the line of men and women waiting their turn. A quiet gesture, a professional courtesy, leadership without speech, authority without noise. That nod said more than any order ever could. As she slung the rifle over her shoulder, the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the range. She didn't linger, didn't seek applause. Her boots carried her toward the exit, dust rising in her wake. Behind her the whispers grew, not mocking now, but hushed, uncertain, touched with something else. Respect, raw and unpolished, spreading like embers carried by wind. The colonel stood frozen, arms still crossed, eyes tracking her as if trying to rewrite what he just witnessed. His voice, when it finally came, wasn't meant for anyone but himself. "Damn," he muttered, "she really is something." Mara didn't hear him. She walked on, the dog tags in her pocket pressing against her leg, the weight familiar, grounding. Ahead she thought not of victory, not of proving herself, but of the next mission, the next silent trial where strength would be measured not by how loud one shouted, but by how steady one stood when the world doubted. Not all heroes shout. Some just carry their history, etched not in words but in silence. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than the rifles echoing across an empty range. Why did she walk away, instead of staying to claim the silence she'd earned? That was the question hanging in the air long after her boots had vanished from the cracked concrete. Soldiers lingered by their rifles, the smell of brass and powder still clinging to the wind, but their minds weren't on the targets anymore. They were on her. Mara didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose to ignore it, the way she'd learned to ignore almost everything that didn't matter. Respect, recognition, admiration. Those were luxuries she'd buried years ago. The only thing that mattered now was keeping her hands steady, her breath measured, her mind locked onto the one truth she could trust. You survive by precision, not noise. The barracks were quieter than the range. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering against paint that had peeled in places no one bothered to fix. Mara dropped her gear onto the bed, the springs groaning under the weight of the rifle as if they understood the burden it carried. She sat for a long moment, elbows resting on her knees, palms pressed together. Her eyes didn't close, though the exhaustion tugged at them. Sleep wasn't something she found easily anymore. Not since Afghanistan, not since the Ridgeline ambush. Images came back without her asking. Callahan's body jerking when the rounds tore through. The metallic taste of blood in her mouth where she'd bitten down to stop herself from screaming. The blur of shadows retreating into pine trees, the silence of the mountain pressing in, crushing, unforgiving. She reached into her pocket. The tags, cold metal, edges worn smooth from years of her thumb brushing them in moments like this. She squeezed them hard enough to leave faint marks in her skin. A ritual, a reminder. The door creaked open. "Lieutenant." She didn't look up right away. She recognized the voice, Private Jennings, hesitant, words sticking like sand in his throat. The same kid who had muttered doubts at the range, loud enough to think he was safe, quiet enough to believe no one would notice. "Yeah," she said finally, lifting her head. Jennings lingered in the doorway, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. He looked younger without the rifle, just another kid playing at being a soldier. His eyes darted between the floor and her face, unsure which one held the safer ground. "I just wanted to say back there, at the range, I didn't mean." "You meant it," Mara interrupted, not unkindly. Her voice carried the calm of someone who'd been through far worse than careless words. "You didn't think I belonged there. That's fair, most don't." Jennings flushed. "I was wrong." Mara studied him for a moment, the way his shoulders hunched under invisible weight, the way shame burned at his ears. She could have dismissed him, could have cut the moment short, but there was something about him, the youth, the rawness, that pulled at her memory. She'd been him once. All doubt and bravado mixed into a dangerous cocktail. "You weren't wrong," she said quietly. "You just hadn't seen enough." His brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" She leaned back, exhaling slowly, eyes drifting to the rifle resting on the bed. "This world judges quickly, too quickly. They look at you, they measure you by what they think they see. A girl with a rifle, a kid in a uniform. They don't know the weight you carry. They don't ask what you've lived through. They just decide." Jennings nodded faintly, though she wasn't sure if he understood or just wanted the conversation to end. He muttered something like "thank you" before retreating, the door clicking shut behind him. Alone again, Mara let the silence stretch. She stared at the rifle, at the notches carved deep into the stock, each one a choice, each one a ghost. 121. She hadn't planned to keep track, not at first. But after Callahan, after that long night in the mountains where she held the line alone until reinforcements came, she'd carved the first mark into the stock. Not for pride, not for memory, for discipline. A way to remind herself that every shot had a weight, every pull of the trigger carried a cost. Her hand brushed over the newest notch, still raw, the edges uneven. She closed her eyes and the desert came back, the convoy, the ambush, the sudden flash of movement on the ridge. She had pulled the trigger before the enemy even realized she'd seen him, saved the men below. But the echo of his body hitting sand haunted her anyway. The knocks came sharper this time. "Kaninkeda." The colonel's voice, rough, clipped. She opened the door to find him standing there, still in fatigues, cap tucked under his arm. His face was stern, but his eyes, gray, tired, edged with something almost human, studied her with a new weight. "Walk with me," he ordered. They stepped into the night air. The training grounds were empty now, the range silent, shadows long under the glow of floodlights. Hendricks didn't speak at first, his strides long, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite force out. Finally, he stopped, turning to face her. "What was that today?" he asked, voice low. "What are those marks?" Mara didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, testing him the way she tested her shots, measured, deliberate. "They're not trophies," she said at last. "They're reminders." "Of what?" "Of cost. Of what it takes to keep breathing when someone else wants you dead. Of the friends I couldn't save and the ones I did. Every notch is a choice I can't undo." Hendricks studied her. The bravado from earlier was gone, stripped bare under the weight of something he couldn't laugh off. He shifted his cap in his hands, his voice quieter when he spoke again. "Most soldiers don't carry that kind of weight." "Most soldiers haven't seen what I've seen," she replied simply. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of generators, the whistle of wind across the empty lot. Then Hendricks said something she didn't expect. "There's a mission." Her eyes narrowed. "There's always a mission." "This one's different," he said. His gaze dropped for a second as if he were weighing whether to continue. When his eyes lifted again, there was no arrogance left, only gravity. "It's off the books. Not every name will come back from it, and I don't trust most of the men I've got to pull it off. But you." He let the thought hang, unfinished. Mara didn't press him. She already knew. The missions that mattered most were always the ones no one admitted existed. She looked out across the empty range, the echoes of gunfire still fresh in her mind. She thought of Callahan, of the convoy, of every ghost tied to every notch in her rifle. Her jaw tightened. "When do we leave?" Why did Hendricks hesitate before giving her the details? He had never been a man who paused. Orders were his language, certainty his armor. But as the two of them stood under the pale light of the range floodlamps, his jaw worked like gears grinding without oil. His cap twisted once more in his hand before he finally spoke. "It's a retrieval," he said, though his voice carried the weight of something more. "Classified cargo, lost in a hostile zone. Intel suggests it's still intact." Mara tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing. She'd heard words like that before: cargo, intact, retrieval. They were placeholders, shields meant to cover something darker. People who used language like that rarely wanted to admit the truth of what they were sending soldiers to recover. "What aren't you saying?" she asked. Hendricks didn't answer immediately. His gaze shifted toward the horizon, where the lights of the base flickered faintly in the distance. "We're short on time. The window is narrow, and the area is crawling with hostiles. The team needs someone who can watch their backs from the shadows, someone who doesn't miss." "Cargo," Myra repeated, her voice steady but sharp. "Or someone." His silence was answer enough. Mara let the weight of it settle. Rescues were always worse than retrievals. Lives were fragile, unpredictable, far heavier than any crate or case. She thought of the dog tags in her pocket, of the ghosts carved into her rifle stock. One more life to protect. One more chance to fail. "When do we leave?" she asked again. 0400, briefing room 3. He turned and walked off, leaving her under the floodlamps with the dust swirling around her boots. She didn't move for a long while, her eyes tracing the stars overhead, the rifle heavy against her shoulder. Another mission. Another chance to prove what silence and precision could do when arrogance had failed. But this one felt different already. The briefing room was colder than the night air had been. Fluorescent bulbs cast a sterile glow across the long table where 5 soldiers sat waiting, their faces unreadable in the harsh light. The walls were bare except for a map pinned at the far end, red markers dotting a valley like bloodstains. Mara stepped inside, her presence drawing the kind of silence she'd grown accustomed to. They had heard, no doubt. Word spread fast in places like this. The range, the kernel, the rifle with its marks. Stories had a way of mutating in the retelling. Some would see her as a myth, others as a threat. Neither mattered. Hendricks stood at the head of the table, his tone clipped, businesslike. You all know why you're here. We've got a down transport off the books, carrying something we can't leave behind. Enemy forces secured the crash site. Intel says they're holding it here. He jabbed a finger at the map, where one of the red markers glowed beneath the overhead light. Mara's eyes scanned the terrain. Rugged, narrow, unforgiving. Valleys that could funnel them into kill zones. High ridges perfect for ambush. It wasn't just dangerous, it was suicidal if handled wrong. Hendricks's voice cut through her thoughts. You'll move as a small unit, 6 of you. Speed, stealth, precision. Get in, secure the cargo, and extract before they know what hit them. The soldiers exchanged glances, their faces shadowed by tension. Mara studied them, one by one. Sergeant Cole, broad-shouldered, scar splitting across his cheek like a reminder of how close he'd already come to death. His eyes were hard, but there was something calculating behind them. A man who thought before he pulled the trigger. Specialist Vega, lean, restless, fingers tapping on the table as if they couldn't stand still. His reputation had followed him. Demolitions, fast hands, a fuse burning just as quick. Corporal Ruiz, quiet, watchful. His gaze followed every movement, absorbing without speaking. Mara recognized that kind of silence. It mirrored her own. Private Jennings sat at the end of the table, shoulders hunched, jaw tight. His presence surprised her, though she kept her expression neutral. He was young, raw, barely blooded. And yet Hendricks had placed him here. Maybe to test him, maybe to test her. And then there was Mara herself, standing slightly apart, the weight of 121 marks pressing invisible but undeniable against the air. Hendricks's eyes swept the table. You move as one, you succeed as one, you fail. His voice caught for a moment, then hardened again. Failure isn't an option. The words hung heavy, but Mara's mind was elsewhere. She was studying the map again, the ridgelines, the valleys, the places where men had died in every war that came before this one. She could see the ghosts waiting there already. Questions? Hendricks asked. Vega smirked. Yeah, why her? He jerked his chin toward Mara. We've all heard the stories, the notches, but stories don't keep you alive. What makes her so special she gets dropped in with us? The room stiffened. Jennings' eyes darted to Mara, then away again. Cole's jaw tightened as though he expected an explosion. But Mara didn't give Vega the satisfaction. She spoke softly, almost too softly, but the words carried. I don't miss. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was respect, reluctant and heavy. The kind earned not through explanations but through the certainty in her tone. Hendricks didn't intervene. He didn't need to. He simply nodded, tapping the map once more. 0400, gear up, dismissed. They filed out into the night, the cool air brushing against uniforms damp with anticipation. Mara lingered near the map, her eyes tracing the red dots one last time. She could almost hear Callahan's voice in her head, the way he used to joke before missions, masking fear with laughter. Don't overthink it, Kaninkade. Just breathe, aim, and let the rifle do the talking. She closed her eyes, exhaled, and for a brief moment the world shrank to silence again. Jennings' voice pulled her back. Lieutenant. He stood hesitantly in the doorway, his young face caught between fear and determination. Why me? Why am I on this team? Mara studied him. She could have told him the truth, that he was probably a pawn in Hendricks's test, that his survival odds were lower than he wanted to believe. But she didn't. He didn't need that weight. Not yet. Because someone believes you can handle it, she said instead. Now it's your job to prove them right. His shoulders straightened a little, not enough to make him look ready, but enough to show he was trying. Mara walked past him, her rifle heavy in her hands, the night stretching ahead like a road she already knew would be paved with ghosts. The hours crawled until dawn. The base stirred with quiet urgency, boots hitting concrete, whispers echoing down narrow halls. Mara sat alone with her rifle, cleaning it with the ritual precision of someone who understood that survival often hinged on the smallest detail. Every swipe of the cloth was a meditation, every click of the reassembly a prayer. At 0400 they gathered again, 6 shadows preparing to step into the unknown. The sky was still dark, stars faint above the horizon. The helicopter's blades whined low and steady, slicing through the silence. Hendrik stood by the ramp, his face unreadable in the floodlights. His eyes met Mara's briefly, a wordless acknowledgement passing between them, neither respect nor defiance, just necessity. She climbed aboard, the others following, the interior vibrating with the hum of engines. Cole checked his rifle with steady hands. Vega grinned like a man daring the devil to blink first. Ruiz sat motionless, eyes closed, saving his strength. Jennings clutched his weapon too tightly, knuckles white, but his jaw was set. Myra strapped in, her fingers brushing once more against the stock of her rifle. The notches seemed to press against her palm, each one a reminder. 121. Would tonight make it 122? The helicopter lifted, dust spiraling in its wake, the base shrinking below. Ahead lay only darkness, ridges like teeth waiting to swallow them whole. Mara's eyes stayed open, steady, storm-dark. She didn't pray, she didn't hope. She just prepared. Why did the valley feel too quiet? The helicopter's blades cut through the night, wind rattling against helmets and packs. Inside, no one spoke. Cole sat rigid, eyes scanning the black horizon as if he could already see the ambush waiting for them. Vega tapped a rhythm against his knee, restless energy leaking into the vibrating metal floor. Ruiz was motionless, conserving strength. Jennings stared straight ahead, lips pressed tight, fighting the urge to show how young he still was. And Mara, she sat in silence, her rifle cradled across her lap like an old truth no one else wanted to admit. Her thumb traced the notches in the stock, her breathing steady. She had done this before. She had felt this silence before. The silence that came not before peace, but before impact. The pilot's voice crackled in her earpiece, 2 minutes out. Mara's eyes flicked toward the darkness outside. Ridges rose sharp against the faint light of the moon, their jagged silhouettes cutting the sky into broken lines. Valleys twisted below, choked with shadows. Too many places to hide, too many angles to kill from. Her instincts whispered, something's wrong. She had learned to trust that whisper. It had saved her more times than training manuals and tactical briefings ever had. Eyes up, she said into the calm, her voice calm but firm. Jennings flinched slightly at the sound of it, like he hadn't expected her to speak. Cole just nodded, checking his scope. Vega smirked, muttering, always, though Mara saw the way his fingers twitched faster against his leg. The helicopter descended, skimming low over the terrain before banking hard. The ramp dropped with a metallic screech, and the cool bite of mountain air rushed inside. Dust swirled, stinging eyes, catching in throats. Go! They hit the ground in a staggered line, boots sinking into loose gravel, knees bending with the weight of their packs. The helicopter lifted immediately, blades kicking a storm around them before fatting into the night. The silence it left behind pressed heavy, broken only by the crunch of their steps as they moved toward the ridgeline. Mara's eyes swept the terrain. Rocks jutted like teeth from the earth, brush clung in patches, the air sharp with pine and dust. But it wasn't the sights that made her jaw tighten. It was the absence. No birds, no insects, no distant rustle of life, just silence, thick and wrong. Her hand brushed the stock of her rifle. She slowed her pace until she was walking beside Cole. "You feel it?" she asked. His scarred face tilted toward her, eyes narrowing. He gave a single curt nod. Too quiet. Ruiz's voice came low through the calm. "They know we're here." Vega snorted softly. "Or maybe they're scared of us." But no one laughed, not even Vega himself. They pressed forward, the terrain sloping downward into the valley where the red marker on Hendrix's map had burned into their memories. Every step echoed too loudly in Mara's ears. Every shadow stretched too long. Finally, the wreckage came into view. The transport had gone down hard, metal twisted, fuselage cracked open like a ribcage. The smell hit them first, thick and metallic, blood and fuel mixing into a stench that clung to the back of the throat. Smoke still curled faintly from one wing, glowing embers buried in the wreck like dying stars. Jennings gagged but caught himself, hand tightening on his weapon. His eyes darted to Mara as if searching for permission to feel what he felt. She gave none. She simply moved forward, her rifle up, eyes scanning the ridges above. Something was wrong. The sight was too still, too clean. Cole crouched near the wreck, his gloved hand brushing against the torn metal. No bodies. Jennings blinked. What? No crew, Cole clarified. Not a single one. They didn't burn, they didn't scatter, they're gone. Ruiz's eyes lifted to the ridges, scanning. Taken. Mara's stomach tightened. She remembered Hendrix's hesitation, the way he'd avoided her question. Cargo, not someone, both. The crash hadn't killed them, which meant the enemy had them. Alive or dead, she couldn't tell yet. Vega kicked at a piece of wreckage, his voice sharp. So what are we even here for, if the cargo's gone? Shut it, Cole snapped, eyes cutting to him. But Mara wasn't looking at them anymore. She was staring at the ground. The dust around the wreck was disturbed, footprints overlapping, dragged marks scoring the earth, tracks leading away. She crouched low, running her fingers lightly over the grooves. Not just footprints, heavy ones, boots, several men moving fast, dragging weight, prisoners, cargo, both. Her voice came low, steady, but it carried. They didn't leave it, they took it. Jennings shifted nervously. Took what? Mara's eyes lifted, scanning the dark ridges where shadows seemed to thicken. That's the question. The comms crackled suddenly, a burst of static sharp in their ears. Cole stiffened, raising a hand for silence. Ruiz dropped to a knee, rifle up, eyes trained on the rocks above. Jennings fumbled slightly before steadying his grip. Then the shot came. A crack split the night, echoing across the valley. Dust exploded near Vega's boots, shards of rock stinging his legs. He swore, diving for cover. Contact, Cole barked. Gunfire erupted from the ridges, muzzle flashes tearing the dark. The air filled with the scream of bullets snapping past, the ground exploding in bursts of dirt and stone. The quiet valley was suddenly alive with chaos. Mara didn't flinch. She dropped prone, scope lifting to her eye, breath steadying even as the world erupted around her. Her finger brushed the trigger, her pulse slow, her mind narrowing to the single silhouette she could see against the ridge. Exhale. Click. The figure dropped. She shifted immediately, another target in her sights. Click, another fall. The notches on her rifle weren't numbers now. They were muscle memory, carved into every nerve, every bone. She didn't think, she didn't hope, she just acted. But even as she fired, she knew. This wasn't an ambush set to kill them. Not yet. The angles were wrong, the fire too scattered. It was pressure, hurting fire. They're pushing us, she said into the calm, her voice calm even as rounds shattered stone inches from her face. They want us to move. Move where? Jennings shouted, his voice cracking. Mara's eyes stayed, locked on the ridgeline. Into the valley. Cole cursed low, firing controlled bursts into the rocks. It's a trap. Yes, Mara said softly. She squeezed the trigger again, another silhouette collapsing. The question is what's waiting inside it. The night swallowed her words, but the weight of them sank into every heart around her. They were no longer hunters. They were prey, being pulled toward something none of them yet understood. Why didn't the enemy press harder? That was the thought that kept circling in Mara's mind as the echoes of gunfire faded into the ridges. They'd taken losses, she knew by the sudden silence of their rifles, but instead of tightening the noose, the fire slackened. Controlled, calculated, as if the enemy wasn't trying to destroy them at all but to funnel them further into the valley. Dust still hung in the air, curling in the moonlight. Jennings panted beside her, his face pale beneath the streaks of grime, hands gripping his rifle like it was a lifeline instead of a weapon. Cole crouched behind a boulder, reloading with movements sharp and efficient. Ruiz stayed low, eyes scanning the darkness, silent as always. Vega spat in the dirt, muttering curses under his breath, his bravado rattling at the edges. "They've stopped," Jennings whispered, his voice too loud in the sudden quiet. "No," Mara corrected softly, her scope still trained on the ridge. "They're waiting." The words landed heavy, making Jennings shift uncomfortably. Vega let out a short laugh, harsh and hollow. "Waiting for what? We're the ones with the rifles. Let them come." But Mara's gut twisted. She felt this before, the pull of an enemy too confident, too patient. A hunter's patience. Cole caught her eye. "What's your call?" For a moment the weight of it pressed on her chest. She wasn't the ranking officer. Hendricks hadn't given her command. But when Cole asked, when the others glanced at her, Jennings most of all, she knew the choice was already hers. Her finger tapped lightly against the stock of her rifle, brushing the notches carved into the wood. Each mark a choice. Each one carved after trusting her instinct over doubt. "We move," she said. "Toward the fire," Vega barked. "Toward the valley," Mara replied evenly. "That's where they want us, and if that's true, it's because that's where the answers are." Cole's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Ruiz followed without a word. Jennings hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes, but when Mara met his gaze, he swallowed hard and steadied himself. Even Vega, grumbling under his breath, fell in line. They advanced slowly, hugging the ridgeline, rifles up, boots crunching on gravel that seemed too loud in the stillness. The valley opened before them, a gash in the earth stretching wide, shadows pooling thick between jagged stone. Every step felt like walking into a mouth that was already closing. Mara's thoughts circled as they moved, Hendricks's hesitation, the word cargo, the absence of bodies at the crash site, the tracks leading away, the way the enemy had pushed, not killed. This wasn't about supplies, not about weapons. This was about someone. The tracks grew clearer as they descended, drag marks in the dust, deeper footprints where weight had shifted. Prisoners bound, forced forward. She knelt once, fingers brushing the earth. She could almost feel it still, the scuff of boots, the struggle of men pulled against their will. Her chest tightened. Callahan's face flashed in her mind. The way his body had been dragged after the ambush in Afghanistan, how she hadn't been able to stop it. She pressed her lips into a hard line and stood, her rifle heavier in her hands. "Not again." "Movement," Ruiz whispered suddenly, his hand signaling toward a cluster of rocks ahead. The team froze, dropping low. Mara pressed her scope to her eye, breath steadying as the world narrowed to the circle of glass. Shadows shifted near the rocks, 3 figures, not enemy fighters, prisoners. Her pulse jumped. Their uniforms were torn, faces bloodied, hands bound. One stumbled, dragged by the others. American. Cole's voice hissed low. "Survivors." Jennings exhaled a shaky breath. "Thank God." But Mara's focus sharpened. If there were survivors here in plain sight, it wasn't by mistake. She tracked the rocks above them, the ridges beyond. Too exposed, too convenient. "It's bait," she murmured. As if on cue, the night cracked again. Gunfire erupted from both ridges, sharp and merciless. The prisoners dropped instantly, one crumpling, the others flattening themselves against the earth. Bullets ricocheted off stone, sparks lighting the dark. "Cover them," Cole barked, firing controlled bursts toward the ridge. Vega lobbed a flash grenade, the explosion lighting the valley for a split second, silhouettes jerking back from the blast. Jennings fumbled but steadied, his rifle barking into the night. Mara was already moving. She darted forward, low and fast, bullets snapping past her ears, stones shattering at her heels. She slid behind a rock near the prisoners, her rifle steady as her eyes swept the ridges. Click, one hostile down. Click, another. The fire slowed for a heartbeat just enough. She turned to the prisoners, voice sharp but steady. Move now. One groaned, clutching a leg slick with blood. The other two half-dragged him, stumbling toward the team. Cole and Ruiz laid down, suppressing fire, bullets kicking dust and stone into the night. Jennings fired blindly, panic sharp in his eyes. Jennings, Mara snapped. Controlled bursts, aim, don't waste. He jolted at her voice, then steadied, his round suddenly sharper, more measured. Not perfect, but better. They pulled the prisoners back behind the line, Vega throwing smoke to cover their retreat. The valley filled with the hiss of white clouds, swallowing the ridges, buying them seconds. Status, Cole barked. One prisoner was unconscious, his chest rising shallow beneath blood-soaked fabric. Another shook violently, shock already setting in. The third clutched at Mara's sleeve, eyes wide, lips trembling. They wanted us alive, he gasped, voice raw. They wanted. His words broke off into a cough, blood speckling his lips. Mara gripped his arm. Wanted what? His eyes flicked toward the ridges, panic burning. Then he whispered one word before collapsing. Her. Mara froze. Her. The gunfire surged again, tearing through the smoke, forcing them back against the rocks. Cole cursed, Vega shouted, Jennings fired wildly. But Mara barely heard them. Her mind locked on the word, the weight of it crashing down. Her. Not cargo, not crates, a person. And not just anyone. Someone they were willing to lure a whole team into a valley to get. The pieces shifted in her mind, clicking into place with a clarity that chilled her. This mission wasn't about recovery. It wasn't about survivors. It was about bait. And she wasn't sure anymore if she was here to save someone. Or to be the someone. Why had Hendricks told her? The thought burned through Mara's chest even as she fired another round into the ridges. The smoke thinned, revealing muzzle flashes like angry stars across the rock. She moved with practiced precision. Click, exhale, click, each shot dropping another silhouette. But the word from the prisoner replayed in her head, louder than the gunfire. Her. The enemy wanted her. Jennings stumbled beside her, panic flashing in his eyes as he reloaded. Cole slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle, jaw clenched. Vega cursed loudly, hurling another smoke grenade into the open. Ruiz crouched low, eyes darting, calculating. Mara's breath steadied as she scanned the ridge, not just at the shooters, but at the angles, the way they shifted fire. Hurting, always hurting. They're not here for them, she said suddenly, her voice low but sharp in the calm. Cole glanced at her, confusion flickering. What are you talking about? They're holding back, Mara pressed, eyes narrowing through her scope. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead. They're trying to push us deeper. Vega barked a laugh, bitter and sharp. Into what? You think there's some magic trap waiting for us down there? Mara's finger tightened on the trigger. Another target dropped, the crack echoing, her jaw clenched. Yes. The word landed heavy. Cole's face hardened, understanding dawning. Jennings swallowed, gripping his rifle tighter. Ruiz remained silent, but his gaze cut toward Mara, steady, searching like he'd already guessed the truth. The enemy's fire faltered again, just for a breath. Enough. Cole snapped his hand up, signaling. Move. They darted from cover, dragging the prisoners with them, sprinting across the valley floor. Bullets chased them, snapping rock, kicking dust. Vega shouted, half in rage, half in exhilaration. Jennings' breath came ragged, his boots slipping in gravel, but he kept moving. Mara ran low, rifle up, scanning, always scanning. The ridges loomed taller as they pressed forward. Shadows swallowed them whole, the stars overhead shrinking behind jagged stone. The valley narrowed, twisting like a throat closing around them. Her chest tightened. This was it. This was the funnel. They slid into a shallow ravine, rocks shielding them from immediate fire. Cole crouched, pulling his map, his voice sharp. "We can't hold here. Options." "Back," Vega spat. "We fight our way out the way we came." "They'll cut us down," Cole snapped. "You saw it, they're baiting us." "Forwards know better," Vega shot back. "You think whatever, waiting down there is a gift." The argument crackled in the air, heat building. Jennings shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between them. Ruiz stayed quiet, but his hand tightened on his weapon. Mara didn't join in. She crouched on the edge of the ravine, scope lifting, eyes sweeping the ridges ahead. She could feel it in her bones, the way the enemy moved, the way the silence pressed too heavy. This wasn't about survival. This was about her. "Why?" Her thumb brushed the notches on her rifle. 121. Each one a story, each one a ghost. Did they know? Did they count? Had her silence carried further than she'd wanted? She remembered the faces, men who had taunted her, underestimated her, dismissed her. And the others, the ones she'd killed before they could kill her brothers. Maybe somewhere out there her name had become a warning, or a prize. Cole's voice cut back in sharp. "Lieutenant." She turned, his eyes met hers, steady, searching. "What do you see?" She hesitated, then, "They want us to keep moving, which means forward is the only way." Vega groaned, slamming his fist against the rock. "Perfect. We walk right into their arms." "Better than waiting here for the bullet with your name on it," Cole snapped. Jennings spoke suddenly, surprising them all. His voice cracked, but it carried. "She's right." They turned toward him. The kid's face was pale, sweat streaking his brow, but his jaw was set. "Back there, the prisoner," he said. "Her. They want her, not us." His eyes flicked toward Mara, guilt flashing. "If we stay, they'll surround us. If we go forward, at least we control the choice." Vega swore again, but no one answered him. The silence that followed was heavier than the argument. Mara's chest tightened. She didn't confirm, didn't deny. She just let the truth hang unspoken between them. Cole nodded once, forward then. They moved into the narrowing throat of the valley, boots crunching softly, breaths held too tight. The air grew colder, heavier, as if even the earth knew what was coming. Jennings walked close to Mara, his young face tight with questions he didn't dare voice. Ruiz scanned the rocks with quiet intensity. Vega muttered under his breath, cursing shadows, cursing Hendricks, cursing the mission. Cole stayed at the front, his rifle steady, his scar catching the moonlight. Mara brought up the rear, her rifle sweeping, her mind a storm. "Sorry." The word echoed in her head, colliding with memories. Callahan's death, the mission's since, the weight of every notch. She'd never wanted recognition, never wanted to be known, but maybe she was in ways she hadn't chosen. The valley widened into a basin at last, rocks rising in jagged walls around them. And there, in the center, under the faint glow of the moon, movement. Figures, dozens of them. The enemy. Waiting. They didn't fire, didn't shout. They just stood, rifles gleaming in the pale light, eyes locked on the 6 intruders who had walked straight into their jaws. Jennings' breath hitched audibly. Vega swore, louder this time. Cole raised his rifle instinctively, his voice tight. "Hold." The enemy parted, and from their ranks stepped a man, tall, broad, his face shadowed, but his presence unmistakable. Authority. He walked forward slowly, unarmed, his hands open. His voice carried across the basin, deep and deliberate. "Lieutenant Mara Kincaid." The sound of her name in the dark froze the team where they stood. Jennings' eyes widened. Vega's mouth fell open. Even Cole flinched just slightly. Mara stayed still, her rifle steady, though her pulse thundered in her ears. The man's lips curled in something like a smile. "We've been waiting for you." Why did the man know her name? The basin was deathly still, every soldier frozen in the moonlight, rifles raised but unmoving. The enemy stood like statues carved from stone, shadows stretching long and sharp across the ground. Dozens of them, maybe more. And yet none fired, none moved. All eyes were fixed on her. Lieutenant Mara Kaninkade. The voice rolled across the rocks, deep, steady, practiced. A man used to commanding attention, used to shaping silence into a weapon. He stepped closer, the enemy parting for him, their rifles never wavering but never firing either. Jennings' breath shook in the calms. How the hell does he? Quiet, Cole snapped. But his voice was taut, strained. Mara kept her rifle steady, her eyes locked on the figure approaching. He moved with the calm confidence of someone who knew the field already belonged to him. His face was scarred, lines cut deep into weathered skin, his hair dark against the pale gleam of his teeth when he smiled. "We've heard the stories," he said, his tone almost conversational, almost mocking. "The woman with the storm-gray eyes, the one who carves her victories into the stock of her rifle. 121. Is that the number now?" Vega muttered a curse, his grip tightening on his weapon. Jennings' eyes flicked toward Mara, wide and uncertain. Ruiz said nothing, but his body was rigid, coiled. Mara's chest rose and fell slowly. Her thumb brushed the stock, the familiar grooves pressing into her skin, notches meant for her, not for them. She didn't answer. The man's smile widened at her silence. Discipline, control. Yes, they spoke of that too, but you see, silence can't protect you here. Silence doesn't command this field, I do. He spread his arms slightly, a gesture that swept over the enemy soldiers flanking the basin. 100 rifles gleamed in the dim light. Cole's jaw tightened. We don't need to listen to this. But the man's eyes flicked to him, sharp as a blade. No, you don't, and yet here you are. 6 little ghosts wandering into a valley that's already your grave. Why? Because she told you to. The words hit like shrapnel. Cole's shoulders stiffened. Vega cursed again, louder this time. Jennings looked between them, fear rising in his throat. Ruiz's eyes, dark and calm, lingered on Mara. She felt their gazes pressing, questions they hadn't spoken yet. Why her? Why did he know her name? Why had Hendricks sent her here? Mara's pulse steadied, a storm raging under the surface but never breaking through. She kept her rifle up, her eyes never leaving the commander. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice calm, deliberate. The man chuckled. "Straight to it, good. What I want, Lieutenant, is simple, you." Jennings flinched. Vega spat into the dirt. Cole swore under his breath. Ruiz didn't move. The commander tilted his head. "You've haunted our people for years. Do you think we don't count our dead too? Do you think your silence hides the echo of every bullet you've fired? We know the ridgelands you've stained. We know the villages you've defended. We know the graves you've left unmarked." His voice hardened, sharp and cold. 121. I want to make it 122. Jennings whispered, barely audible, "He's here for her." The words were a confirmation of what they already knew but hadn't admitted. The prisoner's warning, the funnel, the ambush. It had never been about cargo. It had never been about survivors. It had always been her. Cole's voice cut through the comms, low and fierce. "We're not handing anyone over." The commander laughed, deep and humorless. "You think you have a choice? Look around, you're surrounded, outnumbered 10-1. Maybe more, you fight, you die, all of you. She comes with me, maybe some of you crawl away alive." The weight of the choice pressed heavy in the silence that followed. Vega's eyes darted, wild with anger and fear. Jennings' lips trembled, his youth showing in the sharp edges of panic. Ruiz stayed still, his silence louder than the rest. Cole's face was set, stone-hard, but his eyes flicked toward Mara just once. The question was there, unspoken. What now? Mara's heart thudded against her ribs, steady, relentless. She remembered Callahan's face, the blood in the snow. She remembered every ghost carved into her rifle stock. She remembered Hendricks's hesitation, the way he'd said nothing, the way he'd sent her anyway. She knew then. This had always been the plan. Her breath drew in slow, controlled. She lowered her rifle slightly, not in surrender but in acknowledgement. "You've gone to a lot of trouble," she said softly. "Why?" The commander's eyes gleamed. "Because even silence leaves a trail, and yours has been loud enough to echo across continents. You are a symbol, Lieutenant, a ghost they whisper about in camps and trenches. Break you," his smile sharpened, "and we break them." Jennings shook his head, panic flashing. "No, no, we can fight." Mara cut him off, her voice firm. "Stop." He froze, her authority slicing through his fear. She looked at Cole, at Ruiz, at Vega, at the prisoners they dragged from the wreck, barely alive, barely standing, then back at the commander. Her pulse slowed. Her thumb brushed the stock again, the notches pressing sharp against her skin. "Then take me," she said. The words landed like thunder, echoing in the calms, in the valley, in the hearts of the men who stood beside her. Jennings' eyes went wide. "No, you can't." "Quiet, Private," Cole snapped, though his voice was rough, strained. Vega swore violently, shaking his head. "This is insane." Ruiz finally spoke, his voice calm, measured like a blade unsheathed. "She's not wrong." All eyes turned to him. He met Mara's gaze, steady, certain. "If they want her, they won't stop. Not until they get her. We fight now, we all die. She goes, maybe some of us live." The words tore at Jennings, his face contorting. "That's not fair. She's the only reason we've made it this far." Mara's chest tightened. The kid didn't understand. Or maybe he did and hated it. She stepped closer to him, her voice low but firm. "Listen to me. Survival isn't fair. It never was. You live because someone else doesn't. You breathe because someone else can't. That's the cost. That's the truth." Jennings shook his head, eyes wet, his youth breaking through the dirt and blood. But he didn't argue. Cole's jaw worked, grinding against words he couldn't bring himself to say. Vega's fists clenched, his rage burning useless against reality. Ruiz simply nodded, the decision already made. Mara turned back to the commander. "I'll come," she said, "but they walk away." The man's smile widened. "Agreed." The enemy rifles shifted slightly, not lowered, not relaxed, but aimed at the others less sharply. A concession, a signal. Mara exhaled slowly, her eyes sweeping once more over her team. Cole's scarred face, hard but haunted. Vega's restless defiance. Ruiz's calm silence. Jennings' raw fear. The prisoners barely standing, leaning against each other. They would live. She would not. Her rifle hung heavy in her hands. Her thumb brushed the stock one last time. 121. The ghosts pressed into her skin, sharp, unyielding. She stepped forward. Into the silence. Into the trap. Why did her steps sound louder than 100 rifles? Each bootfall echoed in the basin, sharp against stone, too heavy for someone who moved with such calm. The enemy parted for her, rifles raised but still, their eyes following her every movement. Mara walked forward, shoulders straight, rifle hanging at her side. The air was cold, the silence suffocating, but she didn't falter. Behind her, the team held still. Jennings' voice cracked once in the comms, "Lieutenant, please," before Cole cut him off with a sharp, pained, "Stand down." Vega muttered curses into the dirt, his rage useless now. Ruiz didn't speak. His silence was acceptance, hard and steady. Mara didn't look back. She couldn't. The commander stood waiting, his smile sharp against the dark. 121, he said softly, almost reverently. "Do you know how many nights we've counted that number? How many men whispered it before they died?" Mara's eyes stayed locked on his, gray and storm-dark. Her thumb brushed the stock of her rifle one last time. She didn't answer. He tilted his head. "That silence of yours, it frightens them, frightens me, because silence is harder to fight than noise. Silence never blinks, silence never begs." His words were meant to break her. They didn't. Mara's breath came steady, a controlled exhale that masked the storm inside. She thought of Callahan, his laugh echoing in the mountains before the ambush. She thought of the kid in Syria, his last words barely a whisper before the sand swallowed him. She thought of the notches, 121 choices she hadn't wanted but had carried anyway. Now she would carry one more. The commander's hand lifted and enemy soldiers stepped forward. One tore the rifle from her grip, another bound her wrists. The wood stock left her palm reluctantly, the notches pressing against her skin for a final second before vanishing. It felt like losing a limb, like losing history. Jennings' voice cracked again, louder, desperate. "No, we can't just." Cole's voice broke too, hard but rough, meant to hold him together. She made her choice. Vega spat into the dirt, fists clenched. "This is wrong." Ruiz's voice came quiet, steady, carrying more weight than all the rest. "It's survival." Mara didn't turn, she didn't need to. She heard them, felt them, knew the weight they carried would never leave. That was the cost, that was always the cost. The commander leaned closer, his voice low. "You walk with me now," and they walk away. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. She gave a single nod. The rifles lowered slightly, not in trust, but in acknowledgement of a deal struck. Cole gripped Jennings' arm, dragging him back before the kid could do something reckless. Vega muttered under his breath, his rage spilling uselessly into silence. Ruiz lifted his rifle, eyes never leaving Mara, as though memorizing every detail of her stance, her face, her storm-gray eyes. The commander raised his hand. The enemy shifted, opening a narrow path through their ranks, a corridor of shadows. Mara walked it without breaking stride. They moved her into the mountains. The terrain swallowed sound, jagged peaks cutting the sky into pieces. Her wrists burned under the ropes, her shoulders ached from the rough hands shoving her forward, but her steps never faltered. She kept her eyes steady, her breath calm. The commander walked beside her, silent at first, then speaking softly, like he was addressing a student. "You think you've chosen sacrifice, that you've given yourself for them, but it is that simple. Do you know what symbols are, Lieutenant? They're louder than bullets. They live longer than battles. You've been made into one whether you wanted it or not." Mara didn't answer. He smiled faintly at her silence. "And now, by breaking you, we break that symbol. We show them the storm-gray eyes are just human, that the ghost bleeds." She kept walking. His smile faltered just slightly. He expected fear, rage, despair. He got none, only silence. Back in the basin, the team dragged themselves away under the watchful rifles of the enemy. Cole's face was stone, but his eyes were raw. Vega spat curses at the ground, his fury choking him. Ruiz moved like a shadow, silent, unreadable. Jennings stumbled, tears mixing with sweat, his voice breaking in whispers. "She gave herself for us." Cole's jaw tightened. She gave herself for the mission, for survival. But the words sounded hollow even to him. Jennings shook his head violently. "No, she gave herself because none of us would have made it without her, because she carried all of it, all of them." His eyes blurred with tears. "And now she's gone." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. Mara was led into a crude camp carved into the mountainside, torchlight flickering against stone. Tents stood scattered, rifles stacked, voices low. She was shoved to her knees near the center, ropes cutting into her wrists. The commander circled her slowly, his eyes studying her the way a predator studies prey. 121, he said again, savoring the number. "And yet here you kneel. How many of them begged? How many cried out before you silenced them? Will you?" Mara lifted her eyes, meeting his. Stormgray, unflinching. Her voice came low, steady, calm. "No." His jaw tightened. Silence stretched. The enemy shifted uncomfortably around the fire. Even they felt it, the weight of her calm, the defiance in her stillness. She was bound, unarmed, surrounded, and yet somehow she wasn't defeated. The commander leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "You think this makes you strong?" Her lips barely moved. "No, this makes me theirs." The words puzzled him for a heartbeat. There's her team, her ghosts, her silence carried forward. Hours later, when the team finally staggered back toward base, Hendricks was waiting. His face was hard, unreadable, but his eyes flickered when he saw they were one short. Cole approached, his voice tight. "She gave herself so we could walk away." Hendricks nodded once slowly, as though he had expected it all along. Jennings stepped forward, rage and grief burning through his youth. "You knew, didn't you? You sent her because you knew." Hendricks didn't answer. Jennings' fists clenched, tears cutting through dirt on his cheeks. "She wasn't cargo, she wasn't a mission, she was a person. And you," his voice cracked, breaking into silence. Hendricks's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth was already carved into the valley behind them. Mara sat in the camp, wrists raw, body aching, but her eyes steady. The commander circled her still, his smile thin. "You can't fight silence," he muttered. But even he knew he was wrong. Because silence was fighting him already. In the basin, in the valley, in the hearts of the men she'd left behind, in the memory of every soldier who'd watched her carve respect into a rifle stock one notch at a time. She was unarmed, bound, alone. And yet somehow still undefeated. The story doesn't end with bullets. It doesn't end with explosions. It ends in silence. In the weight of choices made, sacrifices carried, ghosts remembered. Mara Kincaid wasn't remembered for the notches on her rifle, not for the storms she endured, not even for the choice she made in the valley. She was remembered for the way she carried it all, quietly, without demand, without noise. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that silence, heroes are born.